Can you believe it is already time for another rambly video on this channel? I'm surprised, but I have things on my mind that I don't even know how I'm going to say them, but that's exactly why this is exciting. In the previous video, I mentioned that Aatrox Jobatsu helped me with my quest to find my center. What is my core? What inspires me and motivates me to create anything that I want to create? And I thought that I'd found this center of mine, or rather, I did find it, but I couldn't quite grasp it. I couldn't quite identify it, and he told me identifying it is important. After a conversation on the Discord server at the night that I'm recording this, I think that center has become tangible. I think I understand it now. For the record, I don't think that my center mirrors most people's. I don't think that it's something that really can be applied to everyone, but I still think it's important to share it for those who might understand it or for those who think differently and want a different perspective. I would like to bring you back to whenever I was in grade school and I had to write a lot of papers, usually creative papers, but still lots and lots of papers. And I think that people can relate to the struggle that I had to go through with the guidelines of all of these papers. You always had to start with a brainstorming map. You always had to take out a sheet of paper and draw a little bubble with a word in it, and that's your central subject, and then you had to draw arrows out to other bubbles and write words in those, and that was another subject that was a subset of the original subject, and then keep branching them off into other paths, thinking about every little detail of what you're going to write about before you actually start writing. And then you had to apply this to a very specific formula of introduction, topic 1, topic 2, topic 3, conclusion. That's what every paper was. You have to write something to fit this formulaic structure, and that's your first draft, and then you get feedback, and then you write your second draft, and you get feedback, and then you finish your final draft, and you turn that in. I always thought this was a dumb process. I never liked it one bit. I always felt like the steps before the final draft were so pointless, so I just started with the final draft. I would always write the final draft first. If I had to turn in a rough draft, I would write that afterwards. I always felt like my writing was most effective when I just made it up as I went along. To those who don't share my creative practices, it might not seem like this is a valid solution at all. But I acquired this feeling of validity with my methods when I turned in papers and they always had this 1 to 4 rating system where 4 was just about as good as you could do, and I can't remember a time when I ever turned in a paper that got anything less than a 4. And this wasn't just in elementary school. I also remember a time in high school when it was around Halloween, we all had to write stories for an English class. Whenever we got our papers back, my story was the only one that didn't have a grade written on it. And the reason my teacher gave for not putting any ink on the paper is because she thought that would ruin it. Because she thought it was apparently good enough to not be touched. Needless to say, this has given me a good bit of confidence in my ability to completely improvise stories. And I think it's because I don't think so much about the logic behind what's going on as I do the feelings that are connected with each moment. Another support that I have for my artwork being more driven by feelings than by thinking logically through things is, in my animation class, we've been taught about Frank and Ollie's 12 principles of animation. Basically, these 12 guidelines to make all of your animation feel better and more relatable to the audience. Before I took these animation courses, I'd never heard of the 12 principles of animation before, and yet I was following all of them already, except for certain ones that I consciously disagree with in most situations. And honestly, it kind of annoyed me that these principles of animation were being taught to me in class, because it's like, this is what the masters do, this is what you should be doing, and I don't want a rule book, I want to be my own person. I'm not Walt Disney or Don Bluth, and I don't really want to be, because even though their animation is very impressive, it doesn't always feel right to me. Going back to writing stories again, to me, the process of thinking of the beginning, middle, and end of a story and starting from vague and going into more specific details, that feels kind of like making a rule book for myself from which to ground everything that I'm making. And I don't function well that way. I don't really like to know everything that happens and then try to make it sound good as I write it. I like to feel the events unfold. I want to be just as surprised by what I'm writing as someone might be who's reading it. And this philosophy of mine has pretty much translated itself into my game design as well. Every game that I've made pretty much started from me just having a general idea of what I wanted to do, and then making it up as I went along. When I made Riddle School, I didn't know it was going to be a series. Whenever I started working on Riddle Transfer 2, I had no idea how it was going to end. Whenever I made Revive, not only did it end up being twice as long as I thought it would be, but I had a story in mind, and that story was completely different whenever I made the game. My only thoughts going into making One Night at Flumpty's 1 and 2 were, I want to make a FNAF fan game with creepy rooms and a happy, stupid-looking egg. I based the gameplay around the parts of Five Nights at Freddy's that inspired me, and just kind of trusted that everything would work out, and it did. Now, this isn't to say that every time I start a project and try to improvise my way through it, it works, because it doesn't always work. But our creative processes as artists aren't exact sciences, and they're not guaranteed to work every time. This is just the way that I've found works best for me. When I said that I found my center, all I really knew was that I was more emotionally driven than logic driven. But now I have identified that it's because I want to feel the same experience that my audience goes on. Not only do I feel like for me personally this is the kind of mindset that produces the best results, but I also think that I have the most fun thinking this way. So, what does this mean for Project Comet? It means basically I don't have a blueprint for it anymore. I have these vague ideas of things that I would like to include further down the line, but I'm not really going to think about them too much. I'm not going to think too hard about what's going to lead up to those events or how they can logically fit together. I'm just going to wing it, basically. I've said before that after all these years of planning the game, I still don't know for sure what it's going to be. Now I'm going to embrace that. I'd been so caught up in the destination that I forgot about the journey, and the journey for me is the important part. Again, I know that this thought process does not apply to everyone. I don't know about you, but for me personally, if I have to hike up a mountain and get aches on my feet and my legs and feel exhausted and dehydrated and sweaty, I could not care less about the view at the top. It's not worth it. But I would be elated to sled down a huge snowy hill just to see some dumpsters. I mean, I'd rather they not be just dumpsters, but I still much prefer that over the mountain climbing. I hope you enjoyed this improvised video about my self-discoveries. You made it to the end of the video. You did it! Have a dumpster.